New York City, late 19th century. Hundreds of thousands of Italian immigrants arrived in America hoping to build a better future. But within the crowded streets of Little Italy, a frightening symbol began to appear. A black hand. For many shop owners, a single letter marked with that symbol was enough to bring days of fear and uncertainty. This was known as the Black Hand. Long before the American Mafia became widely known, the Black Hand had already earned a reputation for intimidation and extortion. But what exactly was the Black Hand? Was it a secret criminal organization or something far more complex? And why do many historians consider it one of the earliest chapters in the history of organized crime in the United States? Let's take a closer look. During the late 1800s, the United States experienced one of the largest waves of immigration in its history. Among those arriving were hundreds of thousands of people from southern Italy and Sicily. Many came to New York with dreams of finding work, supporting their families, and starting over. However, life in America proved far more difficult than many had imagined. Most immigrant families settled in overcrowded neighborhoods where jobs were scarce and wages were low. Many worked long hours in factories, on construction sites, or along the city's busy waterfront. Language barriers made everyday life even more challenging. Many newcomers spoke little or no English, making it difficult to communicate with employers, public officials, or law enforcement. As these immigrant communities continued to grow, local authorities often struggled to understand their language, traditions, and customs. This lack of communication created opportunities for criminals who knew how to exploit fear and uncertainty. Within this environment, groups using intimidation and extortion began to emerge. Their activities would soon become associated with a name that spread fear throughout many Italian-American neighborhoods: the Black Hand. Contrary to popular belief, the Black Hand was not a single nationwide organization. Instead, historians generally describe it as a collection of independent, criminal groups that used similar methods to intimidate their victims. Their most recognizable tactic involved anonymous threatening letters. These letters often displayed a drawing of a black hand, along with symbols such as daggers, skulls, or crosses intended to frighten the recipient. The message was usually straightforward: pay a demanded sum of money or face serious consequences. Victims were often small business owners, neighborhood merchants, or hardworking immigrants who had spent years building a modest livelihood. Many feared that refusing to pay could result in damage to their businesses, physical assaults, or threats against their families. As a result, some victims chose not to contact the police. Instead, they remained silent, hoping the threats would eventually disappear. Unfortunately, that silence often allowed these criminal schemes to continue. The rise of the Black Hand was not driven by a single cause. Instead, several social and economic factors created an environment where these criminal schemes could flourish. One major challenge was language. Many recent immigrants spoke little or no English, making it difficult to report crimes or seek legal assistance. Communication with local authorities was often slow and frustrating. Another factor was a lack of trust. Some immigrants came from regions where government institutions were viewed with suspicion. Others feared that contacting the police could lead to unwanted attention or make their situation even worse. As a result, many victims chose to handle threats privately or not at all. Fear itself became one of the Black Hand's most effective weapons. When a few acts of violence or property damage became known within a neighborhood, the threatening letters suddenly seemed much more believable. Even families who had never received a letter began to worry that they might be next. This atmosphere of uncertainty allowed these extortion schemes to spread throughout several immigrant communities. It wasn't because the groups were especially large. It was because fear often traveled faster than facts. As the early 20th century began, many of the groups associated with the Black Hand gradually disappeared. However, the story did not end there. Some individuals involved in these criminal activities became part of larger and more structured organizations. Unlike the loosely connected Black Hand groups, these newer organizations developed clear leadership, internal rules, and defined roles for their members. Criminal operations also expanded beyond extortion. Illegal gambling, labor racketeering, smuggling, and other forms of organized crime became increasingly common. One of the figures frequently mentioned by historians during this period is Giuseppe Morello. Morello is widely regarded as one of the earliest leaders to establish a more organized criminal network among Italian immigrants in New York. His organization operated with greater discipline and coordination than the scattered Black Hand groups that had come before. For this reason, many historians make an important distinction. The Black Hand was not the American Mafia as it would later become known. Rather, it represented an earlier phase that helped shape the conditions in which organized crime could evolve. The American Mafia developed over time through changing leadership, stronger organizational structures, and expanding criminal enterprises. Understanding that difference helps explain why the Black Hand occupies such an important place in the history of organized crime in the United States. As reports of extortion became more common, local authorities began paying closer attention to the growing problem. In New York, investigators gradually developed new strategies for working within Italian immigrant communities. Officers who spoke Italian became increasingly valuable. They were able to communicate with witnesses, earn the trust of local residents, and better understand the cultural background of the neighborhoods they served. Over time, investigations became more coordinated. Some individuals involved in Black Hand extortion were identified and arrested. Several criminal groups were disrupted, while others dissolved as law enforcement improved its ability to investigate organized criminal activity. Even so, eliminating these operations was far from easy. Many victims still feared retaliation and remained reluctant to cooperate with investigators. The challenges faced during this period also revealed a larger issue. Organized crime was changing. As smaller extortion groups declined, more structured criminal organizations began taking their place. The methods became more sophisticated, and the networks grew more organized than before. The Black Hand was never a single nationwide organization. Instead, it was a collection of independent criminal groups that relied on fear and intimidation to target vulnerable members of immigrant communities during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Although these groups eventually faded, their story remains an important chapter in the history of organized crime in the United States. Many historians view the Black Hand as one of the earliest stages in the evolution of the criminal organizations that later became known as the American Mafia. Its legacy is not defined by power or influence, but by the lessons it offers about immigration, social change, public trust, and the challenges of law enforcement during a rapidly changing era. In our next episode, we'll explore the story of Giuseppe Morello, a figure often recognized as one of New York's earliest organized crime leaders, and examine how his influence helped shape the foundations of what would later become the American Mafia. If you enjoy well-researched historical documentaries that explore America's past through verified historical events, be sure to subscribe and join us for the next chapter.